Hello folks, looks like you made it just in time for yet another marvelous anime video. There was a time when anime wasn't just for entertainment, a time when it wasn't curated to be safe or for streaming services. It was a medium artists used to experiment and explore, leading us to see things that perhaps we were never meant to see. In the shadows of the 1970s, leading all the way up to the 90s, a generation of directors and mangakas pushed the medium to its absolute limit. They created macabre nightmares by hand and put them on VHS tapes, which found their way into the hands of countless young people. For these young adults who had grown up on Saturday morning cartoons, it felt like these works offered a portal into a much more forbidden world where they were no longer sheltered from the darkness that lingers within the human soul. These macabre masterpieces were either censored, banned, or completely forgotten as the years rolled by. They existed in the dark recesses of the internet or in the hands of collectors who coveted them like forbidden relics of a bygone era. In today's video, we'll be digging up these masterpieces for your viewing pleasure. From existential despair to demonic carnage, from erotic nightmares to psychedelic torment, these are 11 macabre masterpieces of retro anime that you were never supposed to see. Let's begin. Angel's Egg, 1985. Long before Mamoru Oshii would release his seminal work, Ghost in the Shell, he would create one of the most esoteric anime of all time called Angel's Egg. It's hard to even call it a movie, as it's more akin to moving artwork that lets the viewer weave their own interpretation of what's happening before them. The story is set in a desolate world being reclaimed by nature, littered with ruined cities, petrified figures, and a mechanical sun. The movie introduces us to two nameless characters, a young girl clutching a giant egg and a young man who emerges from a tank with a large cross-shaped object on his shoulders. We're never given their names or any sort of backstory. In fact, there's minimal dialogue in the film as it tells its tale through shadows, silence, and surreal imagery. The film was made by Mamoru Oshii after he suffered a crisis of faith, and Angel's Egg is supposed to reflect this spiritual collapse. Legendary artist Yoshitaka Amano, known for his work in the Final Fantasy and Vampire Hunter D series, lends his expertise as well, amplifying the film's melancholic, ethereal atmosphere. Even by 1980s standards, Angel's Egg was considered too abstract to market, which wasn't a surprise considering there are no fight scenes, there's little dialogue, there's not even any sort of explanation about what's playing out on the screen. As a result, it tanked at the box office, baffled critics, and slowly sank into obscurity. This was until whispers of it began emerging within hardcore anime communities, calling it the anime that doesn't explain itself. For decades after its release, this anime continued to be unavailable outside of Japan due to rights disputes, which only added to its mystique. It became a lost relic coveted by fans and continues to be treated in this manner even today. It's that rare anime that feels more like a fever dream in motion, riddle you're meant to feel rather than solve. The macabre here doesn't lie in the gore and violence, but in the abject existential emptiness that it confronts the viewers with. Kite, 1998. Moving on from the abstract to something far more grounded in reality, let's talk about one of the most controversial anime to have ever come out in the 90s. This two-part OVA series directed by Yasuomi Umezu, called Kite, pushed the boundaries regarding what was considered acceptable in an animated film or series. Kite tells the story of a young high school girl named Sawa, who's groomed to be an assassin after her parents are brutally murdered under mysterious circumstances. Following their death, Sawa is taken in by two individuals named Akai and Connie, who are actually investigating the murder of her parents. However, instead of getting a loving home where she can heal from her trauma, they instead train her in the brutal art of assassination, set her loose on a number of high-value targets. As if things weren't traumatic enough for a young girl who had just lost her parents, she's coerced into a sexual relationship with Akai, who's supposed to be her father. Even as Sawa begins to sink deeper into the abyss, audience gets to watch as her innocence slowly erodes right in front of their eyes. Alongside her journey into the darkness, a much larger conspiracy begins to unfold, threatening to shake her entire life once more. Somewhere towards the end of the second act of the film, we get a scene so egregious that it's mainly responsible for the film being banned in multiple countries. It's an extremely graphic rape scene where Akai assaults Sawa as her friend is made to watch in horror. As if the rape scene itself wasn't horrifying enough, makes it even worse is that Sawa is a minor. This caused widespread repulsion not just among the authorities, also among viewers. Norway immediately banned the film from being screened or distributed in its territory, an act which was followed by numerous other nations. It was lambasted for having perverse, pedophilic content, and due to the censorship and bans that followed, it's extremely difficult to find an uncut version around unless you really delve into the internet. Despite its controversies, a much watered-down live-action adaptation was released in 2014 featuring Samuel L. Jackson. Genocyber, 1994. Based on the manga series of the same name by Tony Takezi, Genocyber is a sci-fi cyberpunk anime that shocked audiences at the time with its depiction of violence in an animated series. At the helm of this masterpiece was iconic Japanese director Koichi Ohara, who picked up the published volume and turned it into a 5-part OVA in 1994. It's worth noting that there are several differences between the anime and the source material, however, they don't detract from the intensity or integrity of the series. The reputation it's garnered over the years as one of the most graphically violent series out there is well earned and faithfully rendered in the anime. Set in a dystopia where mankind is close to achieving world peace after growing tired of endless war, Genocyber is an anime that reminds us why such a thing is a mere pipe dream. In the series, even as peace seems to be a mere arm's length away, a scientist by the name Nguyen Morgan discovers a nearly limitless power source within what he calls mind shadows that he believes is created by all sentient beings. He discovers a way to harness this technology for altruistic purposes, such as solving the world's energy crisis. However, like in most stories like this, there are those who would seek to control such power for themselves. In the end, before he's able to refine his technology, Nguyen is assassinated and his death is made to look like an accident after he's betrayed by his own assistant, Kenneth Reed. Reed, who covets Morgan's research, allies himself with a nefarious conglomerate, his end goal being to create the perfect weapon called Genocyber in a bid to make his legacy greater than his mentors. To this end, he kidnaps Morgan's 2 daughters and raises them as his own, subjecting them to horrific and inhumane experiments in a bid to unleash Genocyber. The plot kicks off when the younger daughter, Elaine, disappears from his research facility. What follows is a series of brutal events as a mad scramble begins among various parties to recover Elaine, who's also a powerful Esper and more powerful than her older sister Diana. Reed then sends Diana to recover her sibling, but in the ensuing battle she's killed by Elaine. This traumatic event proves too much for Elaine's childlike psyche. She takes in her sister's essence, which finally results in the birth of Reed's magnum opus, Genocyber. He watches on with delirious satisfaction as this murder machine destroys the city and everyone in it. The OVAs unfold across different timelines, each defined by Genocyber and the destruction it leaves in its wake, forever altering the course of human history. This anime is so full of death and the macabre that might be forgiven for thinking that the creators probably delight in all the blood and guts that are present in it. If you're looking for something that will stimulate you mentally, then you've come to the wrong place, as this is one of those animes where the action takes precedence, plot takes a back seat. What Genocyber excels at is explosions, gore, and overwhelming carnage. Due to the manga being incomplete, the series never quite reached the heights it was projected to. Nonetheless, Genocyber continues to be an iconic anime whose name consistently pops up if you're looking at works in this genre. Doomed Megalopolis, 1991 to 92. If Angel's Egg is a silent prayer, then Doomed Megalopolis is a curse screamed into the bones of Tokyo itself. This 4-part OVA series fuses occult horror, historical tragedy, and urban apocalypse into one sprawling nightmare about a city possessed by its own past. Adapted from a historical fantasy novel called Teiko Monogatari by Hiroshi Aramata, the anime is much more macabre and violent. The story begins in contemporary Tokyo, with its narrator introducing the tale of Taira no Masakado, who is executed for opposing the emperor. However, his vengeful hatred for the capital city of Edo leaves a dangerous onryo that must be placated by the citizens over the years. The story then shifts to the Taisho era as it weaves real historical figures into this dark tale of sorcery and magic. At its core is one of the most recurring villains in all of historical anime, Yasunori Kata, a demonic sorcerer who wishes to resurrect the onryo of Masakado to annihilate the city. The anime's atmosphere is oppressive. Black storms over burning skylines, cult rituals, and corpses, giving the impression that Tokyo itself is a tormented entity. When the OVAs were released in the early 90s, viewers were shocked by their graphic depiction of torture, possession, and sexual assault. To put it into perspective, several countries refused to distribute it uncut, and even in Japan, its broadcast was limited to adult video circulation. It's surprising that this anime doesn't come up more during discussions about censored, banned, and extremely violent anime. Belladonna of Sadness, 1973. We've already covered a fair few extremely macabre anime on this list, but this next entry led to the studio behind it being permanently shut down. Belladonna of Sadness was released in 1973 as the final entry in Mushi Productions' Anime-rama trilogy, which consisted of 1001 Nights, Cleopatra, and Belladonna of Sadness. Fans and critics alike have described it as something akin to a fevered hallucination where cruelty and beauty collide. The story takes place in a rural village in medieval Japan where Jin and Jin are a young newlywed couple. However, on their wedding night, the local lord exercises his right of prima nocte and brutally rapes Jin with his courtiers. Distraught, she returns to Jin, who strangles her unconscious despite trying to calm her down initially. That night, Jin is visited by a supernatural spirit that claims to have the power to see that she is avenged. Thanks to a pact with this spirit, the couple grows prosperous even as the rest of the land is ravaged by famine. Shortly after their fortunes rise, draws the ire of the Baron's wife, who, in her jealousy, declares her a witch, has her assaulted by the villagers. In the end, she's burned at the stake as a witch, but due to her pride still being intact, her soul infects the people gathered there. Centuries later, the movie implies that it's her spirit that starts the French Revolution. Decades before anime or cinema at large confronted sexual trauma and female rage so directly, Belladonna of Sadness dared to depict rape, witch trials, and female empowerment. Her deal with the devil isn't about evil, it's about reclaiming agency in a world that stripped her of everything else. This made the film an outlier even among Japan's countercultural works of the early 70s. Too erotic for mainstream release, too political for the erotic market, and too avant-garde for either. Rather than traditional motion animation, much of Belladonna unfolds as still paintings that glide, pan, or dissolve across the screen. Scenes of flowers morphing into female bodies, demons entwined with angels, and landscapes pulsing like veins make it one of the most visually shocking animated films ever created. On release, Belladonna of Sadness was condemned by critics and shunned by distributors. It was too explicit, too blasphemous, and too abstract for the sensibilities of that era. For decades, the film was nearly lost. Only low-quality prints circulated in Japan's underground art scene and among Western animation scholars. Then, in 2015, Cinelicious Pix undertook a full 4K restoration, revealing the original color palette and painterly texture for the first time. The restored version toured festivals worldwide, and Belladonna was finally recognized as the visionary masterpiece it always was. Urotsukidoji, Legend of the Overfiend, 1989. Let's now talk about an anime that's widely considered to be the pioneer of the entire hentai anime scene, without actually being a hentai itself, at least not complete. Released in 1989 and based on the manga by mangaka Toshio Maeda, Urotsukidoji is an unholy fusion of cosmic horror, erotic grotesque, and apocalyptic fantasy. This OVA film series, directed by Hideki Takayama, is considerably different from its source material in many regards. The adapted series comprises 4 episodic chapters, one incomplete OVA reboot of the first OVA, each comprising a varied number of episodes. The story of Urotsukidoji is set in a world where humanity is not the apex species. Mankind shares this world with a race of demons called the Macabre and the Jujinkai, who are half human and half beast. There's a legend in this world that speaks of an overfiend, or chojin, that appears every 3,000 years. It's the destiny of this individual to bring balance and harmony between the 3 races. We follow the story of a high schooler named Tatsuo Gamo, who is found by a troublesome Jujinkai named Amano Jiaku, who has been banished to Earth by the Great Elder to find this chojin. After 300 years of searching, just when Amano's quest seems to be at an end, Kai, led by their leader, Suikakuju, refused to acknowledge Tatsuo as the new chojin. He seeks the chojin's power for himself to use it for the benefit of their own queen. It's therefore left to Amano, his sidekick Kuroko, his sister Megami, to protect Tatsuo from the Macabre. The only problem is that Amano is a sociopath, Kuroko is a lecherous fiend, and Megumi is a nymphomaniac. Despite this, the anime seems fairly normal at the start, but this illusion is quickly shattered when we get the first of many depictions of the Shokusho Goken, or tentacle rape, which this series is credited for pioneering. If your eyeballs haven't been sullied by this yet, we urge you to not Google it. The anime is full of overtly sexual depictions that are paired with graphic gore, as people are sexually assaulted and torn asunder by these various supernatural beings. The film's most infamous scenes involve sexual violence and body horror rendered in nightmarish, surreal animation. Tentacle demons, monstrous transformations, and cities literally consumed by lust. These images weren't merely shocking for shock's sake, they emerged from Japan's eroguru, erotic grotesque tradition, an avant-garde art movement that explored the intersection of desire, death, and deformity. However, in the West, Where the audience was just awakening to anime, exploring much more mature tropes, this was seen as nothing short of corruption incarnate. Ironically, the source material doesn't have anywhere near the same level of graphic scenes as the anime, for an author known for these very things. The US received heavily cut versions labeled adults only, though even those were often pulled from shelves. Uncut tapes circulated underground, their notoriety fueling the film's myth. Ironically, the censorship only amplified its fame. For a generation of fans, Urotsukidoji became the ultimate forbidden anime, a whispered title passed around at conventions and video stores like contraband. The Sensualist, 1991. Adapted from Ihara Saikaku's 17th century erotic novel, Sensualist follows Yonosuke, a charming, world-weary libertine who drifts through Edo-era pleasure quarters indulging in women, sake, and poetry. Each encounter becomes a miniature tragedy, brief, intoxicating, and doomed to fade, but behind his wit and charm lies an emptiness. Yonosuke seeks enlightenment through ecstasy, as though he can glimpse the divine through flesh. However, as each moment of bliss passes, it leaves him with an even greater ache of impermanence. The tone of the anime isn't salacious, but elegiac, just like a sensual requiem for the fleeting nature of beauty. Just like the Belladonna of Sadness, this anime too has a very unique visual style. The animation is inspired by Edo-era scroll paintings with layered textures that mimic traditional Japanese woodcuts. For instance, bodies merge with blossoms and waves, and a single caress becomes a landscape. This aesthetic refinement sets it apart from other anime appearing in the scene during that period, such as Urotsukidoji and La Blue Girl. Despite its obvious visual beauty, the film has an unmistakable undertone of melancholy and decay. Lust here is both sacred and self-destructive, as every drop of pleasure is edged with a reminder of our own mortality. This is where the macabre lies, as Yonosuke's conquests blur together until he becomes a ghost haunting his own desires in a sensual purgatory. It isn't grotesque like Midori no Shoujo or violent like Genocyber, but it's equally disturbing in what it reveals. The pursuit of beauty may itself be a curse. When released, Sensualist was nearly impossible to categorize. Too explicit for mainstream release, too refined for the adult video market, too short for theatrical distribution. It drifted into obscurity, whispered about by animation historians and collectors. For years, it circulated only on VHS and rare laserdiscs with no official Western DVD or streaming release. Even today, it remains one of the hardest art erotica anime to find. However, its influence quietly persists in the works of Masaaki Yuasa, who made Mind Game and Kaiba, and the poetic sensuality of The Tale of the Princess Kaguya. The Sensualist is one of the most exquisite and overlooked pieces of adult animation ever produced. It's a film that elevates eroticism to an art form, balancing carnal beauty with melancholic reflection. It's rarely discussed today, partly because of its explicitness, partly because of how refined and literary it is compared to the boom in explicit pornographic anime that followed. So if you're looking for something different but thought-provoking and macabre at the same time, this one's for you. Violence Jack, 1986 to 1990. Mad Max, Berserk, Kuroshinken, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and Vinland Saga. If any of these works strike a chord with you, then you have to watch Violence Jack. The seminal work of Go Nagai, famed author of the Devilman series, Violence Jack is considered to be the pioneer of the post-apocalyptic genre in anime, along with inspiring the creators of the aforementioned shows. Divided into 3 OVA films titled Violence Jack Harlem Bomber, Violence Jack Evil Town, and Violence Jack Hell's Wind, they follow the titular character Jack as he roves the wastelands of Kanto. The anime adaptation is widely praised for faithfully capturing Go Nagai's seminal work on the big screen in all its macabre glory. The story is set in a not-so-distant future where the Earth's ecosystem is shattered, comet strikes the planet's surface. This leads to a series of natural calamities that destroy civilization as it exists. The Kanto region of Japan isn't spared either, as it's hit by a massive earthquake that's destroyed much of the region. Most of humanity now dwells underground or in small settlements terrorized by warlords and outlaws. Jack is dug up by a group of survivors as they attempt to find their way to the surface. Mistaking him for a brute, they involve him in their petty conflicts, only for him to destroy the evildoers that dwell amongst them. From then on, Jack appears almost like a spirit of vengeance and justice wherever evil coalesces, destroying it in his wake. The 3 OVAs portray Jack as an almost mythical figure of divine retribution, whose history, as we later find out, is tied to Nagai's Devilman series. The series was meant to be a sequel to Devilman, but this was later retconned to make Violence Jack a standalone project. It's not hyperbolic to call Violence Jack one of the most violent anime anime of all time. The OVAs depict scenes of rape, torture, dismemberment, and moral collapse so extreme that multiple releases were banned or censored even in Japan. The infamous Evil Town segment in particular was pulled from circulation in several countries for its sadistic sexual violence and nihilistic tone. Western distributors like Manga Entertainment and Urban Vision released heavily edited versions, cutting entire sequences to avoid legal action. However, uncut tapes still found their way into collectors' hands, which only increased the show's notoriety. Some saw it as tasteless trash, others saw it as the purest expression of Go Nagai's chaotic vision, humanity stripped bare, clawing through its own sins. This is a must-watch just for the pure legacy it represents. It comes highly recommended from us if you can get your hands on it. Midori, the girl in the freak show. There are disturbing and macabre films, and then there's Midori, the girl in the freak show. Based on the controversial manga series written and illustrated by Suhiro Maruo called Shoujo Tsubaki, this is perhaps the most vile entry on this list. This list already features a few eroguro works, but none are as extreme or repulsive as Midori, the girl in the freak show. There are no redeeming qualities to this film's plot, and we advise you not to seek it out. The story revolves around the life of a minor named Midori who lives with her terminally ill mother while trying to make ends meet. She earns a meager living by selling flowers on the streets. It's during one such moment that she's approached by a stranger who offers her help. That day, upon returning home, she finds that her mother has passed away. No one left to turn to, the naive girl approaches the address given to her by the stranger, only to discover that the opportunity he mentioned was to work in a freak circus. At first, the circus promises escape, a strange, vibrant world of performers and magic. But it quickly becomes a prison of rape, humiliation, and sadism where the freaks, the audience, the ringmaster alike abuse Midori. The audience is offered a small ray of hope when she's taken under the wings of a kind magician. This is quickly snatched away too, as it proves to be another form of manipulation. Normally, we'd get a redemption arc of some sort towards the end of the film, but there's nothing like that here. Midori transitions from the abused to the abuser as the abyss continues to swallow her whole. This movie is a bleak peek into the dark, deranged nature of the human psyche. Midori is equally responsible for half of the atrocities in this film, as it completely subverts the idea of a minor as a protagonist in the audience's minds. Upon release, Midori was immediately banned from theatrical exhibition in Japan under the country's obscenity laws. Harada smuggled the film into underground screenings, often showing it privately to audiences who had to sign waivers acknowledging its disturbing content. Many of the original prints were seized or destroyed. For years, Midori existed only as whispered rumors and degraded bootleg tapes traded among collectors. It wasn't until 2013, Harada supervised a restoration, the film resurfaced, though it remains officially unreleased in many countries to this day. We advise you to explore this one at your own peril. The Curse of Kazuo Umezu, 1990. Nowadays, everybody's familiar with the works of Junji Ito, but long before he was drawing spirals and cursed towns, there was Kazuo Umezu, the original godfather of Japanese horror manga. He practically invented the genre, as his works like The Drifting Classroom and The Cat-Eyed Boy shaped the visual and psychological vocabulary of terror that would dominate Japanese comics and animation for decades. In 1990, the height of the OVA boom, Toei Studio adapted 2 of his short stories into a single animated anthology. The series was never meant to be a success, but it emerged from it as something uncanny and unforgettable. The film is split into 2 self-contained stories. Mansion of the Ghost Cat, classic Japanese ghost tale in which a young woman visits her fiancé's family estate only to find it haunted by feline spirits speaking vengeance. It plays like a fever dream of ukiyo-e imagery and gothic melodrama. The Snake Girl is the stronger of the 2 and pure Umezu weirdness. A teenage girl and her brother encounter a mysterious reptilian girl in their new home. Reality fractures into paranoia, mutation, and body horror worthy of David Cronenberg, Canadian director who's widely considered to be the principal originator of the body horror genre. Each segment ends not with resolution, but with a sense of lingering dread, feeling that the curse continues beyond the credits. What makes the Curse of Kazuo Umezu so fascinating is its visual tone. Character designs are almost adorably retro. Big-eyed, innocent faces straight out of 1970s shoujo manga, and yet the situations they're placed in are nightmarish. This clash of childlike sweetness and grotesque horror is Umezu's signature, terror delivered with a smile. The animation itself is limited, even primitive, but that roughness adds to its dreamlike unease, like watching an educational film slowly unravel into madness. The curse of Kazuo Umezu lingers in the brain long after the credits have rolled, just like an ancient unholy curse. Blood Rain, Curse of the Yoma, 1989. Long before Ninja Scroll or Berserk, there was Blood Rain, Curse of the Yoma, grim folktale drenched in mist, steel, scent of death. Released during Japan's late 80s OVA renaissance, it fused ninja action and supernatural dread into a quiet, haunting tragedy. Based on the manga by Kei Kusunoki, Blood Rain, Curse of the Yoma is a two-part OVA directed by Takashi Anno that was released in 1989. In a war-torn feudal Japan, the young ninja Hikage receives an order that shatters his soul: kill his closest friend Maru, who has betrayed their clan. But when Hikage finally confronts him, he learns that Maru has become something no longer human, possessed by a demonic force known as Yoma. As Hikage wanders the ruined countryside in search of answers, he encounters villages cursed by the plague, corpses that refuse to stay dead, spirits feeding on the living. His journey becomes an allegory of loyalty twisted by guilt and of love turned to damnation. As Hikachi traverses the ravaged lands of the Sengoku era, he must fight both external and internal demons in his journey. The Yoma are not simple monsters. They're manifestations of human corruption and greed. They slither under skin, inhabit the dead, and wear the faces of loved ones. Faced with these insurmountable odds, Hikage struggles to keep his own humanity in check. The violence on display that features gore and grotesque transformations further enhances the bleak atmosphere of the series, which seems to exist in a world that's perpetually in twilight. The music, composed by Kenji Kawai, Ghost in the Shell, heightens the melancholy with its slow, percussive, ritualistic tone, and every note feels like an elegy for a doomed world. It's a dark series with next to no bright spots for the characters that dwell in this world. The whole world has gone mad in this series, turning into a gritty setting that blurs the boundaries between reality and fiction. Despite its artistry, Blood Rain was overshadowed by louder contemporaries like Wicked City and Demon City Shinjuku. It never reached mass audiences, partly due to its grim pacing and lack of clear heroes, but among collectors and horror connoisseurs, it earned cult status for its tragic tone, its subtle blend of samurai drama and supernatural despair. For Western viewers who discovered it on a VHS in the early 90s, it felt like uncovering a lost legend. A beautiful, sorrowful nightmare from the shadows of the OVA boom. If you like the shows we mentioned earlier, then this one will probably appeal to you as well. Marvelous verdict! Due to the advent of streaming platforms and the boom they're experiencing, it's easy to forget that anime once lived underground, traded on bootlegs, whispered about at conventions, watched in the blue haze of cathode light by those seeking something forbidden. Anime lovers were looked down upon as otakus and told to grow up, and the works we mentioned today not only represent that time period, but also prove the naysayers wrong. The 11 anime here, from the hallucinatory theology of Angel's Egg, the unspeakable trauma of Midori, aren't just relics of a bygone era. They're acts of rebellion created when artists were free, mad enough to explore the grotesque, the erotic, the existential, and the divine without any safety nets. What unites them isn't simply violence or taboo. Their blood, silence, and surrealism, these macabre masterpieces remind us of what animation can do, few live-action films dare. Many of these works were pioneers in their genres, laid the foundation for some of our favorite anime and manga today. This is despite many of them being buried, overlooked, or banned. We hope that through this video, we've managed to pique your interest enough for you to perhaps go check out some of these anime. Thanks for sticking with us right to the end of this video. Fortunately, it's time for us to say goodbye. If you enjoyed this content, be sure to check out the rest of our channel where we post daily videos featuring all of your favorite anime and manga. See you soon in the next one, but till then, stay safe and stay marvelous.